Welcome to Vital Life Energy Formulas, today's Q&A meeting with the followers of Vital Life Energy Formulas, and we appreciate you all taking your time out to join us today. I had a really good question to kick off the meeting today, which I'll also share and give our understanding of creatine, because it was a question from somebody earlier about creatine. First, I want to start with the post that was sent out to everybody with the most recent newsletter. And I'm just going to share the screen to show you the photograph and how and why we use the ancient geometry to show where and the mapping of the triangles reflecting in the iris. In the understanding of the polarity, the occipital lobe, and the nerves that are there reflex down to the sacrum. Sphenoid, coccyx. As above, so below to above. Many of you that know Jeff have heard that repeatedly over and over. And we work and go by that principle when we're looking at the iris. So you'll see the most recent photo up there on the chart showing you how the pupil and where it's positioned in the iris will show you also where the placement of your sacrum, your occipital, and where it's positioned and how your spine is from looking at where the pupil is positioned. Now, the triangle part is important because that's sitting along. You'll see in the iridology from the principles of Bernard Jensen, he puts the spine on the inside, where you see me showing you with my mouse here. And he does it on the inside of both eyes. But if you read further in his readings, he'll also say that the autonomic nerve reef above is the neck, and then the autonomic nerve reef below is the lower lumbar sacrum, coccyx, and he'll also say the sides of the autonomic nerve reef are the middle of the spine. As those of you that join and have been doing the iridology with us, you'll see also that the reef and how we read the reef, the autonomic nerve reef, is a landmark. It's a fingerprint because there's no two autonomic nerve reefs the same. And it's a landmark in the body because outside the autonomic nerve reef is your major organs. So we put the triangles there so you can see above and below. And those triangles are also reflecting below down to your legs, because your legs in the lower part of the triangle, from the pupil across the lower part of the pupil down, and then coming off that triangle is your legs. So your legs sit at 6 o'clock in the iridology, and then of course all the way out to the outer circumference is the feet. Of course, you can see this iris is showing some fuzziness around the lower part of the iris. Recapping, simple part of the iridology, anything at the top of the eye is to the brain, across the center of the eye is the middle of the body, anything lower half of the body, right eye, right side of the body, left eye, left side. In the brain, the optic nerve crosses over, but not when we're looking at the iris. So yeah, this gives you an understanding. Obviously, you're putting the triangle there, or you put a visual triangle when you're reading somebody's iris. And if you look at anything that's showing up where the triangle is, you know straight away there is a weakness there in the sacrum. This photograph showing you the brown discoloration right in the middle of the triangle. So knowing that is there in the position where the triangle is, know that that person has a weakness there in their sacrum coming from exposure to chemical. And remember, the brown patches, when they're bigger and more depth of coloration, that means they're genetic. When they're small and light colored, they're environmental exposure to chemicals in the environment, medication, drug related, that a person's had in their lifetime. This is hereditary because it's a much bigger patch, but knowing that that's hereditary, it's not just what the person's structure might have had with an injury of some sort, it's also a hereditary weakness within the sacrum. Then you go above and you see the triangle above, and you can see underneath where the triangle is, there's a lesion right there. So knowing that and seeing the lesion there, that the cranial bones, because the occipital is one of the cranial bones, one of the 8 cranial bones, and knowing that the person needs some help in relationship to the occipital because there is a genetic weakness there showing up at the emanation of life. Emanation of life is right at 12 o'clock in the iridology, meaning that this is a genetic weakness from this individual and many generations back because it's right at the emanation of life. So there could have been major trauma in the constitutional makeup going back that's locked up the occipital area, and those bones aren't quite moving and in rhythm with the pulse and the heartbeat and the breath, should I say, the breath and the heartbeat, the pulse, and there can be trauma that's been passed on, which there is trauma because there's a lesion that's passed on many generations. And so the occipital needs to be focused on along with the sacrum in this individual's iris. So when I was showing you the photograph, this is the most recent newsletter for those of you joining. Thank you for joining the Q&A today. See the ancient geometry of the sacrum to the occiput in our iridology. So remember, when you're looking at somebody's eye, you put a triangle above, a triangle below. We can see that wherever the pupil is positioned is a reflex to your spine. An old polarity statement is as above, so below, as above. The corresponding nerves in the sacrum are the same in the occiput. The sacrum is a triangular bone that moves side to side and can move posterior and anterior. The structure is below up, and fluid moving from the sacrum up the spine is the strength of the spine, muscles, hormones, nerves, and cellular network to all the endocrine glands. The movement of the cranial bones above is reflected in the pumping of the sacral bones below. Of course, I was just sharing about the triangle showing above and below a environmental, genetic, chemical exposure, and also a lesion. The movement is what allows the cerebral spinal fluid to flow. In rhythmic motion, the sacrum moves, as an example in nature, a dolphin fin, and fluid moves up the spine. This is the spinal fluid moving in rhythm to move the 8 cranial bones in the brain that move and breathe with our respiration and pulse. Remember, I was sharing acupuncture, Chinese medicine will take the pulse and to feel the breath and the respiration with the pulse. Cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, is a clear, colorless, watery fluid that flows in and around our brain and spinal cord. Those of you that have done the iridology and the meetings that we do with the Q&A, the eye is bathed 80% in the cerebral spinal fluid. So we're looking at your brain. Our brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system. It controls and coordinates everything we do, including our ability to move, breathe, see, think, and feel. The cerebral spinal fluid contains, now this is important, everyone, glucose, amino acids, proteins, amino acids, lipids, castor oil packs, electrolytes, cofactors of your program, providing essential central nervous system nutrition. That's also the reason, those of you on the program and have heard this story, we have older people, as they get older, they shrink because the glucose levels, which comes from glycogen in the liver, the protein levels, the good lipids, the fats, and the dehydration of the electrolytes is the reason people shrink as they get older. You've heard the story many a times where, you know, we have people that are in their 90s that have shrunk, and then after a month of doing the amino acids, which are giving you those nutrients that your central nervous system is made up of. and they rehydrate and they lengthen by 1.5 inches. The central nervous system, the cerebral spinal fluid, contains immunoglobulins and mononuclear cells. That's red blood cells and white blood cells. Our central nervous system has three main components, the brain, the spinal cord, the neurons, your nerve cells. So remember what it's made up of. Glucose, glycogen, amino acids. Proteins, amino acids make proteins. Electrolytes, that's the cofactor of your formulas. The magnesium that's in the formulas, the potassium that's in the formulas, the sodium that's in the formulas, those are the electrolytes. That's what the cerebral spinal fluid is made up of, along with the essential fatty acids that do not oxidize, which is the reason we repeat about how important the castor oil is for all of us, because it's an oil that doesn't oxidize. As we're moving into the warmer weather, it's harder to put the heat packs on when we're moving into this warmer weather right now, as we're moving into summer. Going to the longest day of the year down there in Australia, you all are moving to the shortest day. Down there in New Zealand, Australia, the southern part, you're moving to the shortest day of the year. It's harder to do the heat packs when it's warm out. So you can mix it with the aloe vera and rub it in. The middle areas are important, like your belly button's important. And we were just talking about creatine for those of you joining right now earlier. If you look where the umbilicus is and you go either side of where the umbilicus is located in your body, and you go around like a band, right round to your back, either side of that location, as you go around like a circle from your belly button around to your back, that's where your kidneys sit. So when you do the castor oil with aloe vera and rub it into your belly button, into and around the umbilicus, you're feeding not just the umbilicus, the portal veins that the umbilicus is connected to, that feeds nutrients back to your liver, you're also helping your kidneys. Please type in your questions if anyone has any questions, or you're welcome to come on and on the screen as well if you would like. So the question that was come up before we came on to the call with the iridology was about creatine and losing hair. It was a very good question. So it's a good, I want to record this for you all. And about people that are taking high dosages of creatine and losing their hair. As you know from the pathways that Jeff and Lynn have created many years ago, 30 plus years ago, which is what the program is based on, is setting up the metabolic pathways, obviously serotonin, dopamine, and setting up the different pathways. Well, of course, that's the cerebral spinal fluid we were all talking about just earlier on the call here. Creatine is made from arginine, methionine, and glycine. And so when the liver gets those free-form amino acids, then it makes the creatine so that the kidneys can regulate it. If we just take the end product and we don't make it, then it's going to overload. Our liver's so intelligent, it's not going to keep it there because it wants to make sure that the blood is circulating oxygen to the heart, to the brain, pumping around the body. That's the priority, is the brain. So it's going to send it on. If we're making it and we take it, then the body can regulate it. So what is the reason that somebody then takes high dosages of it and then they start to have their hair, they lose their hair? Not only is creatine for the kidneys, but also the hormone production within the kidneys, which stimulate the bone to turn over red blood cells. Now, red blood cells are not just hemoglobin, they're also plasma. And the plasma of our blood carries nutrients. Also will remove toxin away from the cells. Plasma does. Actually, our blood is 65% plasma and 45% hemoglobin. So creatine stimulates from the kidney function of the hormone EPO within the kidneys stimulates the bone to turn over more hemoglobin, red blood cells, and plasma. That's how essential our kidneys are, but they're also important to the reproductive glands, as all hormones, along with those kidneys, as a hormonal network, communicate back and forth with each other. So those hormones, right, in the kidneys and adrenals, because the kidneys sit right underneath the adrenal glands. So the adrenals have an important part to play with the kidneys. And the hormone there stimulates the bone to make the red blood cells, but also activates hormone in the reproductive glands in the male of the testes and the ovaries in the females. So what is it that causes the hair to, fall out and thin on top? We've got a couple of things happening. Higher testosterone levels from the overload of creatine in the kidneys, and then the reduction in the bone marrow being stimulated to produce the new red blood cells to feed and circulate oxygen to the brain. But also the testosterone levels spike, but that's not healthy testosterone. That is irregular testosterone. And the liver being overloaded doesn't break down the hormone. That's one of the major important jobs of our liver, is to metabolize the hormone. So we got a few things happening when there is a effect of being overloaded and not metabolizing in the kidneys and a high level of creatine in the kidney function. Yes, they build muscle because the creatine holds on to the fluid in the muscle, but the red blood cells are the priority of feeding oxygen into the brain. If we don't get oxygen in the blood to the brain within 2 minutes, we're not going to be here. So the body's going to take it from wherever it can, for it needs the red blood cells in the liver to circulate the oxygen to the brain. And there's the hair falling out. Cysteine is a new red blood cell. Cysteine is our hair. The body will attack the hair to get the cysteine if the kidney's not being stimulated to activate the hormone production in the bone marrow and your plasma, along with your hemoglobin in the blood. So that's the reason creatine is important to make, to regulate it. For the kidneys to be in balance, not only to have that creatine as an important part of the kidney function to stimulate hormone production and to dilate, to filter water and blood, because the kidneys regulate electrolytes. That's one of the job of the kidneys, to regulate the sodium, the salt in the body. It's one of the job of the kidneys, but also it's the hormone production too. Anyone have any? Back again with the recording. I've just got somebody's photograph up here just to share more about the iris and how we're looking at the position of the eye to also the eyelids above and below, because the eye is the most active muscle. Now, it's not just where the person's looking. This person's photograph, you're seeing the person has weakness in the muscles, which the eye is one of the most active muscles. Just like our heart is an electrical muscle, our eye is a very active muscle, one of the most active muscles in the human body. So it's not just where the position of the person is looking with the iris photograph. You see that their bottom eyelid, and you can see the eyelids sunken underneath. And what I was wanting to share is the bottom part of the eye, remember the sacrum, the triangle part, is below on the lower part of the iridology here. And that lower part of the iris itself is where the sacrum stores the vital reserve. So in seeing a person, when you're looking at somebody's eye and you see their eyelid is, the iris is sitting underneath the eyelid, that means there's less vitality, that the person is leaking their vitality, their vital reserves. And sometimes you see a person's eye is up off the eyelid. So they're up in their head. Where this person you're seeing with this particular photograph is sitting underneath the eyelid, and that's the muscles in the eye in this individual. They're light sensitive, but also they're not building the strength of the muscle. They're not rebuilding the muscle. They're light sensitive, and they're draining some of their vitality. That's the reason the eye is sunken underneath. gives you something else to look at with somebody's iris. And I just had a question from, it's okay to read this. A friend's daughter just broke their collarbone in an accident and had surgery to fix the break because of a compound fracture that broke through the skin. Oh my gosh, poor thing, poor thing. So the screws and metal are holding it together. She's in Bali for another week and then back to the States. So giving an overview of what happens in the body when you break a bone in the process of healing. She's a very successful volleyball player in her senior year. I'm so sorry to hear that. Sending her fast healing, sending her healing vibes from our end to her. Okay, so first of all, understanding the shoulder, because it's not just the break of the collarbone. It's the shoulder, the collarbone, it's the clavicle. Obviously, the clavicle is the collarbone, but it's also the lymph vessels, the lymph nodes, the connecting ducts, as well as blood vessels. There's a whole lot that happens up in this area. Now, in the ancient geometry, as we're teaching, that shoulder, remember, if it's left collarbone, left shoulder, it's not just the shoulder, it's also the opposite side to the hip, the right hip. If it's right collarbone, right shoulder, it's opposite to the left hip. And obviously the pubic bone as well. So the healing happens through what we were just talking about earlier about the spinal fluid, and that the proteins, the glucose, the electrolytes, and the lipids is what reknits and gets the bone to regenerate. Now, there are screws, because obviously compound right through the skin, and she's got screws holding it in, to heal. And through the energy flow and the nutrients that the spinal fluid is made up of is how that bone is reknitting and rebuilding. Now, where does that come from? That's the question. It's the shoulder blade that's going to heal that compounding fracture. Those metal screws do affect the nervous system because they do affect the fluid in the spine and can create a overstimulated nervous response and slow down the healing. So zinc's important because it creates like electrolysis when you have metal in your body. So the electrolysis affects the nervous system and the energy isn't able to make a full circuit, meaning, yes, hips and shoulders are above and below, just like the sacrum above and below to the occipital, but also the shoulders and the hips are the largest flat bones in the human body where the bone reknits itself. But the nutrient supply of the fluid up the spine is also what stimulates the bone marrow, particularly in this situation, the shoulder blade, the scapula, to allow that collarbone to reknit and rebuild quickly. And also when those screws are removed, that she is able to also help with any scar tissue and any healing of the connective tissue, and also not go through severe atrophy of the muscles, which is going to happen because she's not going to be using that arm for a period of time. So that's how the bone reknits. It's through the stimulation of the nutrients within the shoulder blades, the scapulas, as well as the hips, and the cerebral spinal fluid moving up the spine, as well as inside the bone marrow. And then because we're dealing with the connecting ducts, the lymph vessels, the lymph nodes along the clavicle there, as well as the blood vessels, there's a lot that, is going on up in that area, because the connecting ducts is how the lymph drains from that shoulder that she's injured into the blood vessels to then drain back to, because everything goes back to the liver. As Jeff has always shared, the amino acids activate the raw material of which they are giving us the raw material to activate the stem cells within the bone marrow via those amino acids moving into your liver when you drink them, or you can put them in apple applesauce, or, you can have them with food if you want to. They can be taken any way you like. They get absorbed in the mouth and then go into your stomach. And because they're powder, they're instantly being absorbed directly into your bloodstream, and they're in the liver within seconds. And then from the liver, it can send it. Obviously, there's an injury here. So the immune system is actually sending the white blood cells to actually heal that injury. There's foreign material holding the collarbone from the break, compounding fracture, so that it can reknit and heal. But that's also going to affect the nervous system, which is the reason I'm saying, there's a lot happening here. And to help heal that is above and below in relationship to the hips and the flat bones of the hip, the liver, which everything gets broken down by the liver, the raw material of the amino acids that stimulate the stem cells within the bone marrow, that fluid, which is the glycogen, glucose, proteins, electrolytes, cholesterol, is what increases those stem cells in the shoulder blade specifically to heal that collarbone and allow her immune system to accept right now the metal holding it, the screws that are holding it, and not reject it, so she doesn't get any secondary infections. So yeah, that's the process. And just got a communication back on the question. She was told the daughter had a very bad flu after she was swollen with fluids. Yeah, that's why, because what I'm sharing about with, what's going on there with the lymph nodes, which sit at the base of the clavicles, and then also the connecting ducts, the blood vessels. And then also we're dealing with the shoulder blade, we're dealing with the nerves, and those are the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus there along the clavicle there and along the shoulders go into the shoulder blades, but they connect to the diaphragm. And that goes around too, from the base of the diaphragm, the umbilicus, the center of the body, top of the head to the bottom of the feet, goes around to the adrenals, kidneys. Oh, we just came back full circle what we were talking about with creatine. Isn't the body amazing how it's mapped? Thanks for everybody for joining me today. I think that's us for today, and we'll see you next week. Anyone wants to join, and anyone's welcome. If you want to share with anyone that wants to come on and hear what we are sharing, please do. And have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy.